I think we'll get started. I see everybody was able to trickle in already. Again, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Office of Brownfields Equitable Community Revitalization Grant ECRGathering Feedback Session. We will be having this session in Spanish and English, and for those of you that joined just a minute or two ago, this meeting is available in Spanish and English. We do have interpretation, and you can select your language by going to the Zoom button on the bottom of the Zoom screen, selecting the interpretation global icon and selecting Spanish as your language or English as your preferred language. We do ask that you take a minute to make that selection now. Otra vez, bienvenidos a todos los que pudieron estar con nosotros esta noche para nuestra sesión. Vamos a empezar la junta y si apenas se reunieron a esta junta, les pedimos, esta junta va a estar disponible en español y inglés. So, si usted prefiere que tomar la junta en español, por favor seleccione su idioma como español, seleccionando interpretación abajo. En la barra de Zoom hay un dibujito de un globo mundial. Escoja español como su lenguaje preferido. Y les daremos unos segundos para hacer esto y de mientras voy a presentar al equipo que va a hacer esta presentación. So while everybody's getting situated, I do want to present with you today the team that will be hosting this meeting or webinar today. We have with us first Miriam Tasnifa Bassi. She is the Brownfield Development Manager for the ECRG program. We also have Vivian, and Vivian is with us, and you can see her there. She will be helping us out with taking the Q&A questions that you put up there and answering questions on the chat. So please feel free to chat Vivian directly if you have any questions. And for myself, just to introduce myself, my name is Patty Ochoa. I'm with the Office of Brownfields, the ECRG program, and to do public engagement. So I will be here to moderate the meeting. Before we get started, I just want to point out some meeting guidelines for everyone. First, this meeting is being recorded. So at any time, if you don't want to be recorded for this meeting, you're welcome to drop out the meeting. These materials will be made available after the meeting so you can then review them later. We are muting them for everyone. We're muting everyone for background noise. That way we have less interruption. The chat feature will be used to distribute information and accept feedback to read during the Q&A period. So any questions you have, you're welcome to put them at the chat. Again, Vivian is there to host us through that process. This meeting is about the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant. We will not be able to address all the topics that you may bring up during the feedback session, but our focus here is for the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant. Next slide, Devin. I've mentioned this before, the language for this meeting is available in 2 languages. So we do have this meeting. We have simultaneous audio interpretation. It's available through Zoom, so you can do that by selecting, again, Spanish as your preferred language. You can also, if you're calling by phone and would like Spanish audio, you can call 877-917-6178 and enter code 4180779#. Si usted está reuniéndose en esta junta usando teléfono y quiere oír la junta en español usando su teléfono, puede llamarnos al 877-917-6178 y puede ingresar el código 4180779 #. Si quiere la junta o oír la junta en español usando su teléfono. Spanish translated presentation slides are available on the meeting announcement, and we will have closed captions for anybody that would like to enable them. You can turn off your closed captions at any time by clicking CC icon or moving the captions on the box. Okay, next slide, please. So a few things for this meeting. We want to go over what the purpose of the meeting is. And like we've mentioned, we're really excited to have you join us today. This meeting is so that we can provide you an overview and an update of the ECRG grant program for round 2. We want to hear from you. We've distributed the round 2 guidelines for you and to hear feedback from the community. So the comment period will be open for any feedback we receive all the way up to May 31st for any round 2 comments. And lastly, we also want to be able to share resources with you in case you're interested in applying, so that you know where to go to read the guidelines, learn more about the program, and receive technical assistance. So we will be covering that in today's meeting as well. And lastly, we do have the Q&A question just to hear from you. I do want to say that this meeting is important to us because we do want to hear feedback on round 2 guidelines. We released round 1 previously, and so we're excited to release round 2, and we want to hear the feedback that you have for us. So with that being said, I will hand this presentation over to Miriam.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you for introducing me, and thank you for joining me and welcoming everyone to our ECRGathering webinar today. My name is Miriam Tasnif Abbasi. I'm the Brownfield Development Manager for DTSC, and I'm also the lead for the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant, which is the topic of today's webinar. And like Patty said, we are here to share information on our program. We think it's a fantastic grant that creates a lot of opportunities for cleanups throughout the state. So we'd like to share the information with you. We're here to listen. We're here to learn about what communities want to get out of their program, what their aspirations are, and how we can use this program to meet those aspirations. We are going to be considering all feedback. Patty mentioned sort of a deadline of May 31st. That's because we're going to be launching the next application period for the ECRG in mid to late August. And so May 31st is sort of like a cutoff for all the feedback that we receive that would need to be considered for this upcoming round. But we are going to be keeping our gathering forum open through the next few months because we are really looking at having an ongoing dialogue and ongoing platform for people to share their feedback on our guidelines, because we also want to be able to consider it for the next round, which is going to open next year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get into the meat of things and talk a little bit about where the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant came from. In 2021, the governor signed the Clean Up in Vulnerable Communities initiative. Basically, what this was an infusion of $500 million to DTSC so that we could use the funds to expedite cleanup and beneficial uses of brownfields, which are essentially properties where reuse is being held back because of known or perceived contamination. And the whole concept behind this was that this program was meant to prioritize properties that are in California's most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. So if you look to the right of the slide, the large kind of blue part of the donut represents the $270.5 million that were allocated to the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant. In addition to that, we have a discovery and enforcement program, which is the next largest program at about $152 million. And that program is dedicated to looking at the many, over 7,000 dry cleaning facilities that exist in the state that may be abandoned or old or shut down, but have left a legacy of contamination. And so that program is a more internal facing program designed to discover those sites and use our enforcement process to clean up those sites. With a prioritization methodology that's being used. In addition to that, we have a workforce development program that's being worked on currently and being developed, technical assistance grants, which we hope to make available to place-based nonprofits and other nonprofits to connect them in a more deeper and meaningful way with our cleanup and the cleanup projects that we're working on. And we're also working on developing a more specific process revolving around setting up community benefit agreements for some of our larger cleanup sites. And there's also a small allocation goes to our existing orphan site program, where DTSC takes the lead on conducting cleanups at sites where there are no responsible parties. So that's kind of the rundown of CVCI. Next slide, please. So the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant, as I mentioned previously, that's $275 million in reimbursement grants. About $75.5 million was allocated last year in round one. We currently have, I think, 53 different grantees that we're working with at about 80 plus sites in many cities and counties across the state. Through this program, we provide funding for community-wide assessments, site-specific environmental investigations, site-specific environmental cleanup. So there's the three different grant types that we offer. Our entire application process is online on a portal. It's a competitive process. And as mentioned before, it really goes to incentivize cleanup and investment in the state's most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. So here are some of the basics. Eligible entities include public entities, any kind of government agencies, tribes, and nonprofits. We have the community-wide assessments that I just spoke about. Those grants are for $350,000. You have to have 3 sites that you want to work on, and you must have access to those sites. You don't have to own them, but access is required. The investigations range from 150,000 to 7 million. This is to conduct investigation at a specific site. And for site-specific cleanups, the range that applicants can apply for is from 300,000 up to $10 million. The site must be located in a disadvantaged community or area, and I'll talk a little bit about that in some of the later slides. There has to be reason to believe that the site is or might be contaminated. This could be either, a phase 1 or phase 2, or information on maybe DTSC's database or the Water Board's database, or maybe the history of the site is such that it leads you to believe that there potentially could be some contamination. The sites must have reuse plans that incorporate equitable development principles. We do require regulatory oversight. Our funding term is 2 years, and payments take place via a reimbursement process. So no cash is provided upfront. As expenditures happen, the grantees provide us with invoices, and we reimburse those invoices. The bullet I skipped over is the establishment of a circular liability defense. This is a rather sort of complicated process. We do have a detailed checklist, which I will also talk about a little bit later in my slides, that help establish that our applicants are, if I were to simplify, not responsible for the contamination. They didn't cause or contribute to the contamination. The site wasn't being contaminated while they owned it, and they conducted due diligence prior to taking ownership of the site. So there's a lot of depth to that circular liability defense, but that was the best way I could think of summarizing it. Next slide, please. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Cal EnviroScreen. The current version is the 4.0 version. So we define disadvantaged areas by the sites that have areas that have a 75% score or higher. And in order to be eligible to apply, in addition to meeting the other criteria, we focus on sites that have the CES score of 75 and above, and we will consider applications below that score only if it's for the primary benefit of a disadvantaged community and it has a poverty score of 50% or higher. And so if you look to the map, which is on the screen right now, the yellow and red currently represent the geographical accessibility to the ECRG funding. Next slide, please. So we've created a tool that will help you find your site's CES score. If you go to the ECRG website and click on I think it's the link for new application resources, you'll see this little series of boxes that I have up on the screen that has the different tools. The draft guidelines are there, draft application is there, the eligibility self-check tool, our project suitability letter, which I'll touch upon those a little bit, but this little graphic that we've got the red squiggly lines around, this is the tool that you use to help find the CES score. You can just put an address in and then the correct score will show up. There's some additional information that we need for the application, primarily related to the legislative district. So we kind of built a tool that incorporates all those pieces of information, which will help you later when hopefully you will apply for these funds. Next slide. So we have a self-check tool online. I think Vivian's going to share that link with you in a moment. And this is basically a tool that if you walk through the tool and answer these questions, if the questions answer yes, sort of to all the questions, then you and your site are eligible to apply. I've only put some of the questions in here, but there's some more questions that you have to answer. But basically, you know, we want to confirm that you are an eligible entity, which is, you know, a unit of government, a nonprofit, or a tribe. You have site access. The site's a brownfield. Sites that have orders on them are not eligible unless there's a certain type of order with the water board, which you can find in the eligibility self-check tool. The site has to have regulatory oversight. We already talked about the CES scores, and there's a specific component for sites that are being considered for housing, schools, or like some sort of sensitive use. The cleanup approach must consider the type of cleanup that does not result in a land use covenant operation and maintenance. And that's something else I'll talk a little bit more when I go into some of the equity considerations that have become part of the fabric of the ECRG. Robust public participation is really important to us. And through our work with the University of California, Berkeley's Office of Othering and Belonging, we are using the spectrum of public participation. It's a specific spectrum that categorizes levels of public participation. And we've used that to put some structure around the public participation approach in our applicants to help us better gauge how they are interacting with the community. We want to make sure that the applicant makes certain commitments to bring benefit, post-cleanup benefit to the communities that they are in. And then there's questions related to circular liability defense. I think what we're recommending is that if anyone is at all interested in applying for our funds, to maybe use the self-check tool to gauge how these questions can be answered. But more importantly, there's a list of information that you need to gather and a list of documents that you need to gather in order to be able to answer these questions. So we do hope that that's a tool that you will use, and it's a tool that would be useful for you. Next slide, please. So equity considerations are really, really important. They are the cornerstone of ECRG and CBCI. We've had a lot of retrospection and a lot of conversations with equity experts to help understand what we can do to build a program that is really going to have meaningful benefit in these communities that we are targeting. So some of the things that we are going to be doing with our money is that if sites are planned, like I said, for certain sensitive uses, we want there to be a very deliberate evaluation of a cleanup approach that's going to lead to cleanup of the property without mitigation measures. So we understand that there are a lot of deep considerations in designing cleanup for a site, but we want there to be a very strong and concerted evaluation of approaches that do not end up in land use covenants, deed restrictions, or operation and maintenance as part of the final remedy. We are also focusing on the essential need for the proposed or planned use to provide value to the community. We have made certain reuses that have the potential to cause pollution ineligible. There's a list that we put in our draft guidelines that talks about the kinds of industry that could potentially have the likelihood of sort of recontaminating a site that we've cleaned up, and we wanted to be really aware of that. So that's something that we've included in our grant. So, for example, at this time, we've determined that we don't want to fund sites where the only reuse is large logistic warehousing, because we know that may provide additional burdens to the community post cleanup. And so those are some of the thoughts that go behind having some reuses and rendering them ineligible. The spectrum of public participation is something that I had mentioned previously. The spectrum categorizes engagement in increasing steps, starting from inform, then consulting, then involving, then collaborating, and then really getting to the point of community governance. And those are the different levels that we're using, and it's already something that we found to be very helpful in helping us gauge the types of public participation, the types of public participation that are deeper than what is minimally required by law. And that's something we really wanted to make sure that our applicants were considering. We are also asking for community benefit commitments. So all of our applicants, who will be eventually chosen from that pool to become grantees, have to make commitments that are associated with expanding economic opportunity within the area, making efforts to stabilize communities, increasing transportation, access, mobility, and connectivity, generally creating healthier and safer communities, and making efforts very specifically to advance the goals of environmental justice for all. In addition to that, we are also trying to provide broad flexibility for our tribal partners who are interested in applying for this money, and making sure that we are respectful of the tribal experience and the unique circumstances of tribes. Next slide, please. So, what are we looking for in round 2 applications? As mentioned, we have a preference for high CalEnviro screen scores and high poverty scores. We're really looking for high impact projects that provide strong benefits to the community, and projects where ECRG funds are really critical to move forward. We'd like more geographic representation. Last time, we did not have tribes we did not have a lot of tribes on it, I think, except for one. We just had one tribe. We want to really increase tribes. And geographically, we are looking to increase applicant and grantees in the Inland Empire, in Central Valley, Coachella Valley, and Far North. And that's why, in an effort to really meet communities where they are, our in-person ECR gatherings are taking place later this week in Fontana and the week after in Fresno, just because we feel that going to these communities and meeting people where they are is going to help us maybe build some bridges and try to attract more applications from those areas. Next slide, please. So how do you prepare for your application? Use the resources on the ECRG website. We have a lot of tools there that we think will be really helpful. We've tried to be very applicant centric when we put this information together, and really hope that this is the kind of grant that is, relatively speaking, easy to apply for. Like I mentioned before, use the eligibility self-check tool to get your information together, to get your documents together, and to really understand if you have a viable project or projects that could use this fund. We will be setting up our ECRG webinars starting the summer, and we encourage you to apply to those. And most importantly, we have the Center for Creative Land Recycling the Center for Creative Land Recycling as our Brownfield technical assistance provider. They are, their service is free to you. This link will take you to Calendly appointments where you can set up 20, 30-minute sessions with them, go over your self-check tool, ask them questions, envision an ECRG project, all the way to the point that if your timing is early enough, they can even do a pre-submittal review of your complete application once the application opens up. So I highly recommend that you work with them. There's no limit as to how many sessions you can have with them. And they are an excellent team who are dedicated to help our applicants apply and build, winning applications. Next slide, please. So what's our schedule? We've got the self-check tool and draft guidelines online now for your review and testing out. We've got, after this virtual session, we have, like I mentioned, 2 more ECR gatherings, one in Fontana and the other one in Fresno. Our applications open up mid to late August. The deadline is in October, and most likely we will release decisions sometime in January. Then we get through the process of executing agreements. The authorizations to spend happens on the date that the agreement is executed. And so we try to work hard and fast to get those agreements signed as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. This other slide, I think I kind of preempted myself, but once again, even though at the risk of repeating myself, 95% of the applicants who worked with CClear last time got funding in round 1. Now we understand round 2 is going to be a little bit different. There's a lot more awareness of our grant, and there's probably going to be a lot more applications. But I think that EPA has also had tremendous success with the work that CClear does. So I think if you think of nothing else but look at that statistic and the green line on this slide, we just encourage you highly to work with CClear. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of my portion of the presentation. I'm going to turn it back to Patty.
Thanks, Miriam. And thank you for providing that overview in terms of what is expected for round 2. And just for everybody listening in, I do want to say Vivian has been posting some of the links and resources that we've been talking about. So, we have an eligibility checklist. I encourage everyone to go use it, go through it, and really take advantage of what Miriam has said, and making a technical assistance appointment with CClear. It really will help you set up like what to prepare for in terms of documents and answer some of those intricate questions that are only specific to each project. So please take advantage of these resources. Miriam has put them on the chat. And again, go to our website for any information. We update it regularly and have all the information needed there. The feedback session, the way we'd like to do it is we're going to open it up for any questions, feedbacks, or comments that you may have. This part of the meeting, the way we're going to do it is we're going to first take questions from any Q&As that have come into Vivian. So there's any chat questions. Then we'll look at the hand. Like if you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand using the raise your hand feature at any time. And then we'll go to the phone as well. The way you can provide feedback if you are on the phone, you will have to press *9 to join the phone queue. So when you press *9, we will be able to see you, and we'll call on you when it's your turn and you're on the queue to ask a question. We do ask, in terms of when you're submitting a verbal comment, when it is your turn, we're going to call your name and unmute you. If you're on the phone, we'll call the last 4 digits of your phone number, or 3 digits. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. So we will be having a timer because we want to make sure we get everybody's comment, question, and feedback as included. So we want to hear from everyone. When your time has expired, we will mute you again. And again, this is just to make sure that we hear from everyone. And after you're called, we do ask that you state your first and last name and the organization that you represent, and state any comment that you have. You'll have, again, 3 minutes to provide comment or ask a question. And we may not be able to answer every question right away. We will take it under advisement for the round 2 and 3. I do want to iterate, our comment period for round 2 is until May 31st, but we are taking comments much later than that at any time because we want to just figure out how to improve our application even past round 2. So any verbal comment or question we're taking that as feedback for this presentation. And again, if you're in the phone, star 9 to raise your hand, and star 6 to unmute yourself. So, and if you are on the Spanish line, the interpreter will ask the question for you. So I think we're going to start, Vivian. Are there any questions on the Q&A or on the chat option?
I don't have any questions sent to me yet, so we can go ahead and open the floor to any raised hands. If anyone has a question, you may raise your hand at this time, and then we'll try our best to answer.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. So I don't see any questions on or any raised hands at this point. So we're going to go to the phone line or to the Spanish line. From the phone line, I don't see any questions or comments. How about on the Spanish interpretation? I don't see any. Okay, thank you. We do have one question. So can you please unmute yourself, 198, the phone number ending in 198?
Good evening. My name is Jeff McLaughlin. I'm with the City of Riverside, the City Manager's Office. And I had a question regarding reuse. So we understand that under this grant, the site needs to be remediated and that the reuse of the site has to be of a community benefit. But how strong does the city need to document the reuse with an application? Do we need to have contracts in place? Do we need to simply point to a reuse of the site that the city can invest in? This strikes me as kind of a two-phase process, cleanup and reuse, but how strong do we have to prove the reuse of the site once it's cleaned up?
Okay. Thank you for your question, Vivian. I'm going to pass that on to you if you can answer that for us. Vivian, I'm sorry, Miriam. So not you, Vivian.
So Vivian and I both panicked. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your question. I would say, the answer to that question depends, because what we believe is that we think of the community-wide assessments as very, very early stage planning, where you're trying to understand how you can use up a certain group of properties for certain reuses. At that point, we just think of reuse being early in the envisioning stages. If you're applying for an investigation grant, we believe that you should be at that stage where you're connecting the level of investigation that you're doing and the cleanup planning that you're looking at doing to the proposed reuse. And so in certain broad categories, we want you to be ready to be able to share that information through the narrative of your application. All the questions are asked to kind of get us the information that we need. When you are at cleanup, we expect you to have more defined cleanup, more defined reuse plans, because we feel that at this point you have because entry to the cleanup grants is a cleanup plan that has either been approved by a regulatory agency or is in the process of being reviewed by a regulatory agency. So under that case, we feel that you should be pretty connected with what your reuse is going to be, because your cleanup is on the horizon and it's going to be implemented within the 2-year grant cycle. And so even though we don't ask for specific documentation about where you are with your reuse planning, we do have a lot of questions. And the further along you are in the environmental process, we assume that there's going to be more depth to the way you answer the questions regarding your reuse, what it is, when it's going to happen, what are the benefits to the community, how involved has the community been in envisioning this reuse. We just have these series of questions, and the points allocated to certain questions related to reuse will be greater and weighed a little bit heavily in the cleanup grants, and weighed a little bit less than cleanups for the community-wide assessment grants, because we're trying to, connect the environmental activities and the depth in the environmental activities with where you may or may not be with your reuse. So no documentation, but a series of questions that will be weighed more heavily depending on where you are in the environmental process.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Does that answer your question? I just wanted to make sure.
It does, because the city was wondering whether we needed to have development agreements in place for housing, funding online, et cetera, in order to kind of prove the reuse that it would be attached to the cleanup itself. So yes, that is helpful.
Okay, sounds good. And come by and see us in Fontana this week. We're in your neighborhood.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We do have some questions in the chat, 2 of them. So I'll go ahead and read out from Walter Gray III. Our in-person gathering is going to be the same as this meeting. We are located far north and don't see any scheduled in-person for our area.
Yes, at this time, we don't have anything scheduled for far north. We're doing these in-person gatherings because we assume that even though we're presenting the same information, there's an opportunity for people to kind of be with us in the same space and ask us more specific questions. Sometimes it is more conducive to open dialogue. So generally, the information is going to be the same. If there is a greater level of interest from parties in far north, we'll be happy to arrange something. So we're definitely open to having a conversation about this. I think Doris from our team can reach out to you and discuss this further, because if you see value in us coming and visiting and looking at your sites and seeing what's going on in your community, we're happy to do that. We can either do that as part of the ECR gathering, or we can do it later as well if you need further support in designing your application. So we definitely want to consider it, and we understand that we don't have a strong presence in far north, and that is something we'd like to strengthen. So thank you for participating today, and we look forward to speaking to you a little bit more on this topic.
Thank you, Miriam. And Vivian, the second question?
Yes, the second question is from Jack Wong. He asked, when will the notice of funding availability be issued?
Mid-August. So mid to late August. We don't have an exact date yet because so many things need to be aligned perfectly for that to be released, but that's what we're aiming for. We're pretty comfortable that it's not going to move much further than this mid to late August range.
Thank you. And the phone line doesn't have any other questions? Are there any raised hands, or does anybody else have another question? Vivian, from your chat?
No, I don't have any further questions.
I do want to just I did receive a comment, and I just want to note that this is a feedback session. So all the questions, comments we do receive from you will be taken into advisement for round 2 and or round 3, depending on the question that you do have. And this is not a formal comment period. Just for some of those that are used to that process, this is really a way for us to have a discussion and dialogue and get to know you a little bit better and figure out how to improve our program through that conversation. So we will be sharing, updates and information what we get from this meeting, but it's not a formal comment period. I think there was a clarifying question about that. So just want to make that clear for everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Patty, for bringing that up, because so many of our stakeholders are so used to these formal comments and response to comments, and we won't be doing that this time. We'll just be looking at everything on a much higher level. So thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I do see a question. I apologize if I say your name incorrectly. Hugh?
Hi, this is Fui Zhang. I'm calling from the city of Merced. And I guess my first question is could you share the resources to identify brownfields here in the city of Merced?
Yeah, so that's a question that's going to take longer than 3 minutes. I think it would be good for us to maybe follow up offline. We can take a look at what's in EnviroStore and GeoTracker and see if we can help you, come up with a list. But we don't officially sort of have a brownfield list. But what we can do is work with you to figure out what we can use and how we can identify some sites in your community.
Awesome. I'll follow up with you on that. And then regarding the way payment is made with reimbursement, is there any way to, I don't know, get cash upfront? It's just with the cash flow. Is there any way that we could go about doing this?
Yes, no, I understand. I understand your question. And I also understand that it is difficult that, we've designed a grant for disadvantaged and vulnerable communities, but we're not providing the cash up front for the work. And I do understand the difficulties that poses, especially for strapped cities like, like yours and others. This is just the way the money is designed. We have no say over that. It's a reimbursement grant. What we do say is that through the reimbursement process, you don't have to have paid the invoice before you send it to us for reimbursement. Now, timing may be off because it takes us anywhere from 30 to 90 days to issue the reimbursement checks, and we require that reimbursement invoices be batched in amounts 15,000, like totaling 15,000. We can't pay interest fees or fines, and so if you do get our grant, you may have to sort of negotiate with your providers to let them know that you're part of this grant, that it's reimbursement. They can invoice you, and you may need to get the money from us before you can pay them. So it's a question that has been asked before. Our grantees, the 53 grantees we currently have on the books, they seem to be managing okay with this, although a lot of them shared the same concerns as you. But unfortunately, putting the cash up front is just not written in the way our money is designed. But thank you for bringing that question up.
Thank you.
Just to connect, if there is a follow-up to the Brownfield discussion, I know we'll be in the city of Merced next week. So if it's possible, Vivian, just to put our ECRG email on the chat, just so that we can have a direct connection. And that way you don't have to go through and look for where, how to contact us. Yep. So you're welcome to send us an email through there. And then Vivian, Cynthia, I see your hand is up. Hi, Cynthia. And if you like to ask a question.
I think it's more of a constructive comments. So I think, it's great that you guys have looked at this reimbursement issue, but I think that, there's more responsibility on your end to make sure that you're serving EJ communities. And so you probably noticed with your first round, a lot of the grassroots communities have not applied. And I think that's just because you make it too hard. So I think it's kind of disingenuous to talk about this accelerated cleanup money that really nonprofits can't plug into unless you're a very sophisticated organization. And I also want to comment on the kind of the process overall, which I've been pretty much following. And in the beginning, we've shared concerns with technical assistance and making sure that whoever the technical assistant providers are trusted by community members. And some of the disconnect between a community group like mine that would be working on a project and a developer who maybe does this more often for a living are thoughts about cleanup. And my group would want a thorough cleanup of anything that happened, because what's the point of going through the motions if you're not actually cleaning up contamination? And developers sometimes like to find ways of stashing the contamination underneath the parking lot, or some other kind of structure to save costs. And I just want to say that's from my point of view very appalling. and why you might not be getting as many grassroots group applying. So I just wanted to give you that comment. I've given them before, but I don't want people to think that we don't want our communities cleaned up, because we do. But if you truly want to partner with us, then you're going to have to trust us, and you're going to have to resource share and not expect us to come up with a reimbursement method. And if we choose not to use the technical providers that you've chosen, I'm assuming that you guys are willing to step up the plate and work directly with the communities yourselves. So thank you for the information and condoning my comments.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that comment. Miriam, I don't know if you want to respond to the comment.
Yes, I would love to. First of all, I want to thank Cynthia for being a friendly face on camera. I really appreciate that. So thank you for being on camera this whole time. I'm going to start in reverse. Yes, absolutely. We have heard, especially from grassroots community groups, that they would rather speak with us directly, and we are 100% open to that. So if anyone wants to speak to us directly, we are available and we are ready to have those conversations, and I'm happy to do so. I'll tackle reimbursement next. Yes, we are. I also agree with you that it's unfortunate, like, that the money was designed this way. We worked a lot with our branch chief, who takes the lead on all of our finances, and that's just the way it's set up. But that's why we have created this process where the work can be done, but the grantees don't have to have paid those invoices in order to request a reimbursement. And we feel, at least in the grantees that we're working with so far, that seems to be a place that makes sense once you get in the groove of it. So I can't change the way this money was financed, but we do have a commitment to make it as easy as possible on our grantees. And I'm happy to talk with you a little bit more about that offline. The biggest and I think most impactful piece of your statement to me was what you shared with all of us today about your vision of what a cleanup needs to be. And I want to tell you today that I have heard that before from your fellow environmental advocacy groups. And I'm finally beginning to understand what that really means. You are connecting people with land, and you want it to be safe. What we're looking at is, the spectrum of what is regulatorily allowable, what is allowable, legally, versus what the communities really want. We're in a space right now where I think we're trying to connect all of those pieces together, because we do have the benefit of having this funding. And that's why one of the things that I talked about earlier in the presentation about how we are considering, we want to have our grantees consider like cleanups, like not mitigation, but actual cleanups for sites with certain sensitive uses. It's a start for us, Cynthia. We're not there where you'd like us to be, but we are going to try and drive this money into those kinds of processes. We are also going to be setting up an on-site treatment technology council where we can better understand what exists in the industry to see how contamination can be sort of destroyed, right, as opposed to being buried, or as opposed to being dug up and transported somewhere else. It's a long process for us, but at least today we are making the commitment to put that on-site treatment technology committee in place. We're going to have technical staff. We're going to bring in, hopefully, people like yourself, part of this like working group, to see what's out there and see where we can apply it, because we have the benefit, of at least 2 more years of this money to understand how communities can really be cleaned up. And so I can say that we're there. We hear you. I finally understand what you really mean. It's an aspiration for your community, and I understand what that means now. And it took me a while to get there. Now that I'm there, I can start seeing solutions, but I do see it as a step-by-step process that we have to go through together, with a continued dialogue with residents and advocacy groups to make sure that we're balancing all these different moving parts that we need. Like you said, I was really happy that you stated, articulated that you do want the communities to be cleaned up. And we want that too. And I think that we have to get there together on the how. But we are ready to make the commitment to gain more knowledge, to try and bring more technologies that'll work to our communities, and to get to that place where we're creating truly a safer space, in these little pockets of land.
Well, that's really great to hear for my last 18 seconds here. And you can count on me, especially when you get to the technology selection. We are stockpiling waste on our site because we are refusing to send it to somebody else's community. And there are good, viable technologies out there, but there is a process that you need to go through with communities to understand what is acceptable and what's not. So count on me.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. And then Sanad, we'll reconnect this conversation. And for anyone else who has that kind of feedback and comments, I think we do appreciate them to hear from everybody. We understand that this brownfield redevelopment is a very complicated process and it impacts everyone. And we want to make sure that everyone benefits, particularly the communities that we're serving. So please continue with your feedback. I do see that Walter has a question for us. So Walter, if you want to unmute yourself, say your question or comment, and also if you, I forgot to ask if you guys are part of an organization, to name your organization. That would be helpful for us. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Hoopa Valley Tribe up in northeastern Humboldt County. And we are really interested in doing a project here in Hoopa, but I must reiterate the speakers earlier with regard to the reimbursement. It's extremely difficult for us. We're operating probably at about a 95% federal and state funded grant operation. We're not a gaming tribe. We don't have a big bank account sitting somewhere to be able to, kind of front load the work that needs to be done under your program. So I just, we just were successful in getting a Clean California Local Grant project through the California Department of Transportation. And they had a process embedded in there that we could request a certain amount of money up front to help with kind of making sure we're able to cover our costs and not lose our contractors, and people who are working for us don't want to wait 90 days for their payment to come in. So, which really kind of makes it impossible, if you will, to make sure that by the time we get through the reimbursement process, if it's that long, they may have left already because they're mad because they didn't get paid. But anyway, not trying to point fingers or anything, but maybe a conversation with the Department of Transportation and how they did that it might have been the law itself. I don't really know, but just a suggestion there. Anyway, happy to be here and learning a lot, and I hope everybody is successful that's going to be applying for your program. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Miriam, did you want to comment?
Yes, I just wanted to first of all say thank you so much. I'm so excited to have a tribe in the house today because, like I said, we really want to bring more tribal projects into use this funding. I appreciate what you're saying and kind of adding more depth to Cynthia's comments previously. I think that it would be great to have you write this down and include it as part of, in our ECRGathering form, because we'd love to take that up. And, there's nothing that I personally can't do anything about it, but I would appreciate having the conversation with other state agencies who have set up their structures differently, because this would definitely go into a recommendation that we would make for permanent for permanent funding of this program, that if we can switch it where we can upfront load the way EPA does, then the conflicts between setting up a program for vulnerable communities will not exist. Like I said, I recognize that conflict, but there's nothing that I can do about it. But we would love to actually get that formal feedback from you so we can share it with leadership, who can share it with our partners in government who make these decisions for us, and make it a recommendation for our future, hopefully permanently funded program.
Thank you, Miriam. And thank you, Walter, for sharing that comment. And we are hearing it. So please continue with those comments. I think it helps reinforce sometimes the ask that we need to also level up as well.
Absolutely.
So, I don't see any other raised hands. Vivian, do you have questions in the chat?
Further questions. So if anyone else has any questions, feel free to chat.
And then for interpreters, I can't see. Are there any questions coming in through the line by any chance?
There are no questions.
Thank you. So we'll go through a few more minutes to see if anybody can think of other questions, but I just want to again reiterate, you're welcome to provide comments, feedback, questions at any time through this process. Again, we're taking all the feedback and considerations to see what's applicable in round 2 up till May 3rd, but we'll continue to receive feedback past that date. Again, it's an informal process. It's just really conversations we're trying to set up to improve the program. So any feedback is welcome. And then just again, go back to the chat for any of the links and resources that were shared by Vivian, and visit our website when you have a chance, just to get further, understanding of the program, and in case you have other questions. But in the meantime, I just see that Jack has a question. Jack, did you want to unmute yourself and state your name, question, or comment?
Sure. Thanks so much. Thank you for hosting this. Quick question. Can one city submit one application for both a community assessment, because we have about 4 or 5 different publicly owned sites that we have access to, as well as either an inspection or a cleanup on one of those sites, because we have a end use that's more definitive. The timeline on that end use is more accelerated, it's near term. So can we do a community assessment on 4 or 5 sites, plus as well a investigative or cleanup on one site in one application?
Before you answer me, do you mind sharing with us where you're calling us from or joining us from?
Santa Fe Springs.
Thank you. Miriam?
Well, Santa Fe Springs, thank you for your question. Yes, right now, we don't have a limit on how many applications a single applicant can turn in. So the idea that you would put 2 applications, one for a series of, community-wide assessments and another one for a site-specific investigation or cleanup, depending on what stage you're at, that's not an issue at all. We welcome multiple applications from applicants.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for that. Jack, any other questions or comments from anyone else? We'll leave up the door open for a few minutes. And I'll just say again, we're hearing what you're saying, and I do appreciate the feedback that is coming through in terms of ways that we can improve our programs. It's always good to hear that. We're, like Miriam said, we're working to improve all levels of our programs. So these conversations are important to us. So thank you. Miriam, while we wait for other questions, we'll give people just 2 or 3 minutes. And then if we don't get any other questions in the next 2 minutes, we'll end this session. But did you want to share any other last points just that have come up from this conversation before we go to the last questions?
Sure. I would love to. I mean, first of all, I want to thank everyone for participating. Everyone's questions and comments really help us think. It helps us think about things from different perspectives, even when we hear the same thing in a little bit of a different nuanced way. from different people, whether they're nonprofits or whether they're cities or whether they're tribes, it really helps us understand who our community is. And these ECR gatherings, that's what that's about, right? We want to know who you are. We want to know what your concerns are, because that helps us build a better program. And we are so thankful to be given the trust and be the stewards of this, wonderful amount of money in this program. But this program is not for us. This program is for you. This program is for your sites and your communities. And our most important goal is to use this money to help make your community a little better, a little brighter, and a little bit safer. And that's what we're here for. And so, I just want to thank everyone for participating and for helping us. And really, I think that we hope these ECR gatherings are going to lead to a better program. We tried to create opportunities for everyone to participate by making one of our ECR gatherings virtual, but in the daytime during working hours. We did this one outside of working hours to accommodate people, in different spaces and with different needs. And, we targeted the Inland Empire and Central California to go in person. Even if like one person shows up, we feel like we've done our job, right? Just to have that connection. Part of going into those spaces is for us to drive around a little bit and understand what the communities look like, because that physical connection, especially post-COVID, is really, really important for us. And, I know we had a couple of people jump on the line and talk to us from far north. And we want to let you know that if we had the resources, we'd be everywhere. We made some choices, but if there is interest in inviting us and having us go far north or the Coachella Valley or wherever it is that you want us to come, we're happy to set up an ECR gathering, and we're happy to do one-on-one meetings. If you want to take our team around your community, we did that with Anaheim a couple of weeks ago, a month ago or so. We walked around Anaheim and got a really good sense of their needs and their history and their struggles. And all these communities like a patchwork, right? Of there's an affluent area next to a not so affluent area. There's a brownfield. There's something fancy. We understand that, and connecting with the spaces physically, I think, really helps our entire team. And so, don't be shy. Tell us you need us there in person, and we'll show up. So, thank you for giving me the space to speak. And, I really can't thank you enough. I mean, this program is going to be better because of all of you who participated today.
Thank you, Miriam. And then we'll just close. I don't see any other last comments or questions. Vivian, checking with you. No. Just to say that, again, we are opening up the conversation and we're getting feedback, ongoing. But if you really want us to include something for round 2, please submit it before May 31st. And just to reiterate what Miriam said, we do have 2 other sessions. We can just put the information on the website again. It's going to be in person, Fresno and Fontana. So please, you want to see us in person, or some of us in person, visit us there. You can also visit the resources on our website, go through the eligibility checklist, set up a TA call. Those are very important. Even if you're not sure where you're at, I say we do have a good team. And I also heard that some people rather connect directly with us. Feel free to connect with us through the ECRG email as well. So whatever your preference, we are here to listen. We try to do as much as we can with what we have. So we do appreciate the feedback and the time that you've given us here today. And there's no other comments. I just want to say good evening and thank you all for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.